The time is just gone 20 minutes past 8 a.m. and we are now going to take a look at an issue where the Western Cape High Court on Tuesday delivered an important judgment, and this is with regards to NGOs and activists who come up against corporates and what is termed corporate bullying, where we find these very, very powerful corporations throwing their weight on a number of issues. And we joined on the line this morning just to understand what this judgment actually means and also some of the background to this judgment. We're joined by Lisa Chamberlain, who is a senior lecturer at the Wits Law School. Lisa, good morning to you and welcome to the show.
Good morning, Inayat, and to you and the listeners.
Yes, wonderful having you with us. Now, Lisa, let's talk about this corporate bullying, and we're talking about slapping back, SLAPP. And just to understand why this court judgment is so significant and also possibly some background that has led to this judgment.
Sure, it is an incredibly exciting judgment, and as you say, a very important one for civil society activists, who, as we know, play an incredibly important role in holding corporations to account. We live in a world where corporate power is significant. And in a constitutional democracy where there are restraints on that power, where corporates aren't allowed to trample on the human rights of ordinary citizens. So there are a range of activists and NGOs that are doing very important work in keeping tabs on that, on the use of that power. Unfortunately, the circumstances in which they do their work are often very difficult. And we know that across the world and in South Africa included, that there's increasing amounts of victimization of activists. So they face threats of varied kinds. We see activists being surveilled, being harassed on social media, having their offices broken into. The threats can escalate into more serious forms, assault, even assassination sometimes. And it's in that context that we have to understand this case, which, as you say, is a SLAP suit. SLAP stands for Strategic Litigation Against Public Participation. And essentially what a SLAP suit is that it's an entity with a lot of power, like in this case, a mining company, who tries to abuse the legal system and who launches a court case that they know is not likely to win. But the point of the case is to intimidate the defendants in the case. So to try and scare them into silence, or to try to tie up all of their resources so that they spend all of their time defending this case rather than continuing with their activism.
Yes, Lisa, and I think this is quite significant in a sense that we often hear of the term corporate muscle and how corporate actually uses its power, and in many instances, even in terms of resources, because sometimes it actually becomes very difficult to go up against a corporate because they have the resource, they can hire the best legal teams, they've got sufficient funds or a fair amount of funds to basically fund any litigation, any lawsuits as well. And this is where NGOs, this is where activists actually come stuck because they feel that they cannot come up against these corporate giants, for want of a better term.
Absolutely. There's an enormous disparity and inequality in both the power and the resources that corporates have versus activists. And that's exactly what a SLAP suit tries to exploit. The intention behind it is if we bury you in litigation and piles of paper in an intimidating court case, that's going to get you to shut up and to stop your criticism, essentially. But one of the things that I think that corporates fail to take into account, those corporates that are trying to use strategies like this, is the intense commitment behind the activism of the work done by civil society and NGOs. In a case like this, the legal teams are acting pro bono. There is an endless list of lawyers who will stand behind activists like this to prevent this abuse of corporate power.
Yes, and also I think when we live in a world where there is a lot of focus on the environment and we're talking about destruction of the environment in many instances, like for instance, we'll find that right across the entire world where we find mining companies that are very extremely guilty of this. And looking at where we are in South Africa, where mining plays a very, very important part. Also on in other countries around the African continent, because this is a continent that is full of resources. And this is a problem where we've seen corporate giants from right across the entire world coming in and obviously flexing their muscles, for want of a better term.
Absolutely. As you say, environmental justice and climate change is one of the most pressing issues of our time. Unless we get this right, none of the rest of it really matters, because we won't have a planet, on which to live. And the COVID-19 pandemic has really kind of highlighted the crisis of climate change with these sort of twin crises that we're trying to deal with simultaneously. Mining is an industry that is responsible for some of the worst environmental destruction in the world. And South Africa is interestingly placed in that, because communities living in South Africa are both on the receiving end of environmental degradation, but South African companies are perpetuating that kind of environmental degradation across the continent.
Yes. Now, just as far as activists are concerned, NGOs are concerned, this judgment obviously means a lot. And as you mentioned, there have been instances where, people have been assassinated, people have been killed, people have lost their lives. And, this obviously has been quite serious over a period of time, a serious development over a period of time. So this means a lot. It gives activists a lot more courage, inspired to continue, especially when it comes to these type of issues, when it comes to coming up against the power of the corporate world.
That's right. A case like this does give activists hope and courage, but it gives them more than that. It gives them legal tools. The thing that makes a SLAP suit unique is that it's an abuse of the legal process, of the litigation system. And what this judgment has done is said that if somebody does hit you with a SLAP suit, you can defend yourself by arguing that this court case is a SLAP suit, and that's a valid defense in law. And so it's really the kind of law pushing back against the abuse of its processes in order to make sure that corporates can't get away with this. So the judgment's important for that reason, and also because it names SLAP suits. SLAP suits are on the rise in South Africa, but there have been very few cases up to now that actually used the term and called this thing what it is. And that kind of naming of this as the form of corporate bullying that it is very important. And the courts confirmed that this is a SLAP suit in this instance, and that SLAP suits are contrary to our constitutional democracy. The other important thing that it's done is it's given us a few practical tips on how to identify a SLAP suit. So things that you can look out for to know whether a case is a SLAP suit or not, which is very helpful to activists across the country.
Well, certainly. In fact, this was the question I was going to raise, because, on the face of it, it seems like it is an ordinary civil suit that is taking place, but or a civil claim that you are making, but it's not the case, Lisa.
Yes, so SLAP suits are typically come in the form of what it might appear to be an ordinary civil claim. The most common form that they come in is a defamation claim, where the company will allege that the activist has defamed them, which is the kind of legal terminology for sort of damage to their reputation. But the hallmark of a SLAP suit is that the intention of the case is not about the case itself, but it's about its intention to silence and to intimidate. So you'll see companies using defamation claims where they don't actually believe that whatever the activist said is defamatory, but they rather want to sue them for defamation, usually for exorbitant amounts of money. It's one of the things that Judge Goliath in this case says, that one of the ways you can recognize a SLAP suit is if the claim for damages is exorbitantly high. And in this case, I think the damages claims were in the region of around 14 million rand. And we're talking here about community activists, a social worker, some human rights lawyers. So kind of clearly disproportionate to be asking for those kinds of sums of money.
Yes, and I suppose just finally the overriding factor, and this is where when we're talking about defamation and the like as well, and we'll find that the motivation behind it in many instances would be seeking social justice in the interests of society, in the interests of community. So, this is a paramount, I think, and this possibly could be the overriding factor as well.
Yes, that's right. And one of the other kind of identifiers or markers of a slap suit that the judgment identifies is that the instigator of the slap suit is typically a powerful corporate entity seeking to protect its own economic interests. Contrast that with the target of the slap suit, which is typically an activist or an NGO or a community who are seeking to protect social interests rather than their own personal interests. And so those are some of the ways that you can start identifying a slap suit and becoming aware that something that might at first glance look like an ordinary defamation claim is actually something a lot more sinister.
Well, Lisa, I must say, very, very significant indeed. And we need to thank you for coming on and sharing what you have with us this morning. We wish you all the best, and please take care.
Such a pleasure. Have a good day.
Lisa Chamberlain from the Wits Law School with us this morning, unpacking the recent Western Cape High Court judgment regarding slap suits, SLAPP, which means strategic litigation against public participation. The time is just headed for 9:30 a.m. We come back and we've got quite a bit more to talk about. We'll be joined by Nasreen Nawaz out of the United Kingdom. Sri Lanka now agreeing to bury COVID-19 victims. And also towards the end of the show this morning, we'll be talking with Siddiq Steenkamp. And this is a press release that is in response to the Sahuk press release, which was dated the 11th of February 2021. And this is regarding refunds of Hujjaj whose Hajj was cancelled last year as a result of the pandemic.